Okay, so quick disclaimer, I did in fact play this game last year when it was still in its early stages, but because it was such a long time ago and I only did it for a few hours, that almost doesn't even count because holy shit, did Dauntless go through some really amazing changes. Anyway, welcome back everybody. Today we're going to take a quick look at Dauntless, a free-to-play action RPG where your only purpose in life is to hunt down innocent creatures, harass the living hell out of them, and at the end of the day, hopefully walk back with your hide so you can dress yourself pretty. Yes, for those familiar with the genre, this is essentially Monster Hunter, except free-to-play, much more cartoonish and less complex, but still very cool. Don't let that detract from the fact that this game is still quite impressive even for a free-to-play game, and I must not be the only one who's thinking this because at the time of making this video, more than 4 million players have jumped into it to the point that the servers are quite literally overwhelmed, and the average queue time I see is roughly 50,000 players, sometimes even more, during peak hours. So it definitely turns some heads now that it's officially supporting all of the 3 major platforms, but the question that remains is, should you play it? Well, today I'm going to go over all of the things that I liked about it and disliked about it, so you can make a better opinion about the game and about both of the sides, so let's get to it. To start things off, I've played Dauntless for the entirety of the past week, and while I only got to level 20 or 21, a lot of the time was spent learning as much as possible about the game, about the mechanics, and I also took my sweet time because this is quite an impressive game. It's also pretty and fun. At first I started playing on my PS4 Pro because it was recently launched on it, so I gave it a go there, but because I just couldn't stand not playing at 60 FPS, I just went back to my PC, so yeah, there's your disclaimer, which is probably the first huge plus for me in terms of this game, and that is the fact that it's crossplay. So not only can you party up with people on literally any of the other platforms it's available on, but you can also use the same account to log between them. Of course, for the PC version you will need the Epic Store client, as Epic Games is the publisher here, but it all took less than 1 minute to log in using the same Google account I've used on my PS4 version, and even the entire progress has carried over, so at least on my side I see that as a huge plus. Anyway, moving on to the gameplay, here is where it starts getting interesting. Despite many people claiming that this is another Monster Hunter ripoff, I have to say that, at least gameplay wise and combat wise, it doesn't really feel like that. In fact, the only thing I see Dauntless sharing with Monster Hunter World is the genre, and that is pretty much it. It's kinda like how there's countless types of racing games or countless types of battle royales. It seems that Capcom really did a number with the Monster Hunter series to the point that there's a whole style that is becoming more and more popular these days, so naturally games like Dauntless will rise up with their own spin on the style, which is very welcomed in my opinion. And yes, I do own both of the games, and I have already spent hundreds of hours in Monster Hunter World on release, but again, I wanted to try something else and Dauntless was right down my alley. Still, this game does feel quite different than Monster Hunter, and I dare even say the combat feels closer to Dark Souls 3 rather than anything. For starters, movement and combat in general feels fast and agile. One thing I found a little bit too frustrating for my liking about Monster Hunter World was the fact that my character always felt slow, a little bit sluggish, and swings with heavy weapons didn't give me the chance to move my character as much as I wanted, and Dauntless also has that for many of its weaponries, especially the heavy ones, but it's definitely toned down. There's still many times you're locked in certain animations, especially when doing combos, but the combat feels more forgiving while still retaining a level of complexity that I find very entertaining, and many people do since many of them are playing it. The monsters, or behemoths as they're being called in this game, also come in all shapes, sizes, and with a whole lot of powers and mechanics. Many of them seem heavily inspired by the ones we already have in Monster Hunter games, but only conceptually because there's many unique mechanics to them. What I did find cool is the fact that later in the game and in the progression, Dauntless goes really well with this. It becomes more difficult, but I know that there's some behemoths out there with some really unique mechanics, like pulling you through a shadow realm where you have to fight them, which I find really nice. So Dauntless is definitely more on the fantasy side, which I really liked. But moving on to the graphics, the game does indeed look cartoonish, which many people might find off-putting, but at the maximum settings on my PC, it does look pretty, and I especially like the art style. I think the art style is one of the strongest points here. I think the creature design is one of the game's strongest strongest points as well, and many of the behemoths in this game look very well made and pretty unique. The same applies to armor and weapon design, which from the very first few levels make you feel very cool and definitely high-end. They also evolve as you level them up, which I find also very cool, but I'll talk about progression in just a little bit. In the meantime, there's also the worlds or the islands you can go into expeditions into and hunt the creatures. There's plenty of biomes, weathers, and also a day and night cycle, but what I did not like so much about this is the emptiness of these islands. Outside of the behemoths, there's not a whole lot happening on them. The lack of any fauna makes the game feel quite devoid of life, and frankly for me it's a little bit immersion breaking. This might change in the future with more updates, as I know this is probably not a priority right now, but for now it's in direct contrast with the rich and alive environments of Monster Hunter World, for example. Now, I did talk about progression earlier, and I will say that I find it quite well made for the most part. At a basic level, this game is all about hunting monsters, taking their parts, and then using these parts to craft better gear, such as armor, weapons, and consumables, and repeating this process over and over again, improving your abilities, improving your gear, and so on, and of course defeating bigger and more meaner monsters every time you progress. It's basically the gist of this entire type of games. Now, the second layer of progression is of course the mastery system or Slayer levels, and I find this one to be also one of the game's strongest points. The current max level in it is level 50, and you get these levels by simply playing around with all of the weapons and hunting down all of the behemoths, as well as completing all of the challenges associated with them. This is honestly a very good way to make all content in the game viable and feel like it's important, because it supports a lot of different playstyles and you get some very powerful rewards in the process as well, such as HP and stamina boost, but most importantly you also get new skills for weapons. So what this means is that you can pretty much play any part of the game you want to and you will get rewarded, and you are actually encouraged to do so and explore everything that the game has to offer if you want to reach that max level. Finally, there's also the Hunter Pass, which gives some really nice rewards. There's a basic free one and another elite paid one, but yeah, it does cost money, and I will talk about microtransactions in a little bit. Moving on to character customization, of course, as you would imagine, there's a character creating screen, and it gives you a rather decent selection of options to pick from. It's not too diverse, but not too low either. In game though, you will cover most of your character with some of the very cool armor sets you get even from early on. I was impressed with the fact that a lot of the starting gear, as I've said, looked very well made, and they also evolve as you level up. Like getting to level 5 definitely applies visual changes to both armors and weapons, and you can even get like extra accessories to them, or extra feathers and whatnot, so pretty decent. The same applies to weapons, and the best part about this is that there's no shortage of weapons to use for different playstyles. So there's swords, there's axes, there's hammers, but of course you also have pikes, repeaters, and my personal favorite, the chain blades. There's also different elemental types you need to take into account, and these depend on each boss that you fight. Like there's blaze for fire, shock for electricity, there's frost, and there's also the cool ones including umbral and radiant. These last two powers are more towards the middle and end game, though they are obviously much more cooler. There's a whole lot I could talk about the weapons, there's a lot of combos you need to take into account, and there is definitely a skill curve depending on which weapon you use. For example, axes and hammers are definitely on the higher end in terms of difficulty compared to, for example, swords and even chain blades or pikes. On top of that, there's also a high diversity of stats that you need to take into account, so this means there's a lot of theory crafting going on, there are a lot of builds you can create, and you would generally spend a lot of time in this type of game because it's also quite complex. But on a final note, as I said, I also want to talk about microtransactions, and I will go quickly over it because there's not much to talk. What I did like about this is the fact that the company isn't pushing your own microtransactions, and there's nothing pay to win in the story itself, at least not from what I was able to tell. It's mostly filled with cosmetic gear and emotes, but honestly I never felt like I needed anything in there because the gear I can earn in game is already very cool. The only thing I did feel compelled to spend money on was the Elite Hunt Pass, and that is because that I felt that the $25 I spent on it was well deserved by the company for the amount of entertainment it gave me, and also because the rewards in it are pretty good, and you can also level the hunt pass really fast. But again, you don't need to spend a dime to progress through this game. It's just a nice flavor on top, and you can also earn some more cosmetics like armors and emotes and all of that. But yeah, this is basically my review slash first impressions of the game. I already have spent probably 100 hours in it. It's definitely fun, and I kinda regret not playing it earlier though, or at least not giving it more attention, because it's definitely enjoyable. There are a ton of players playing it right now, so it's probably going to be the best time to start doing it. And it doesn't really matter if you're new to this type of games or have played Monster Hunter in the past, you're definitely gonna have some fun in it. So give it a try, it's free and definitely fun. And in the meantime, also don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe for more awesome content like this, and I will see you guys later, so peace out.